The adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla are found within the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys. So if you have a kidney, which looks something like this, kind of a kidney bean shape, sitting directly above that, you have the adrenal glands. They have this sort of a shape like this, and the outside layer, which I'm coloring in now, is the cortex. That's generally true that like in the brain, the cortex is the outer layer of the brain. The cortex is the outer layer of the adrenal gland. Okay, so when we look at the cortex, of the adrenal gland, it's separated into three zones, three zonas. Okay, and so the first one is the zona glomerulosa. Zona glomerulosa. And it has that name because the cells of the zona glomerulosa are arranged in this kind of spherical pattern. And this is a relatively thin layer, the cortex. This is the outermost layer, the zona glomerulosa is. Okay, and each one of these layers secretes a different hormone, different set of hormones. There's 3 hormones overall secreted by the adrenal gland, and by the adrenal cortex, I should say. And let's just look at those real quick before we continue diving into the 3 layers. Okay, so the three hormones secreted are 3 types of hormones are glucocorticoids, and these will sound familiar most likely, mineralocorticoids, and finally sex steroids. And I think I should probably just rearrange this so it's a little more let's see here. Right, so let me just move this right up here so it's not quite as confusing, maybe. Okay, rearrange these so I can have them in the order that we're going to talk about them. Okay, so mineralocorticoids are secreted by the zona glomerulosa, which is this first layer that we see here, and the cells of this layer are arranged, like I said, in this glomerular pattern. Now these are different than the glomerula that we find in the kidneys, but the name is the same. So sorry. Let's try this again. So mineral, corticoids. Whew, that's a long word. Okay, mineralocorticoids are secreted by the zona glomerulosa in the cortex of the adrenal cortex, in the cortex of the adrenal gland, I should say. Okay, so what's an example of a mineralocorticoid? Well, aldosterone is the main one that's secreted by the zona glomerulosa. That's the main mineralocorticoid. And aldosterone It's involved in water retention and water water loss in the kidneys. So diuresis, and it's controlled by angiotensin. So angio, that refers to like the vessels, and so when we have angiotensin, and I should say angiotensin 2 to be specific. Angiotensin 2 is a hormone, and it acts on the zona glomerulosa, and it causes it to increase the production of aldosterone. Okay, and so it's this angiotensin 2 is acting on these cells in the zona glomerulosa and causing it to produce aldosterone. So what does aldosterone do? Well, it acts on salt. Okay, it acts on sodium specifically in the kidneys, and as we know, water follows salt, and so water is attracted to sodium. It tends to aggregate around sodium. Sodium is a very water-soluble molecule, water-soluble ion. And so, when we have an increased amount of aldosterone in the kidneys, it causes sodium to be resorbed. Okay, so aldosterone in turn goes and acts on the kidneys. It acts on the kidneys, and it causes sodium to be retained. So sodium retention, and that translates to water retention in the kidneys. Okay, so we can look back up at the original hormone that caused the water to be held onto, angiotensin. If you hang on to water, that means your blood pressure is going to increase because your blood volume, your overall blood volume is increasing. And so tensin, like tense, more pressure, and angio referring to blood or the vessels. So that makes sense when we think about that. All right. So moving on to our next layer. To our next layer, we have what's known as the zona fasculata. Okay, and this zona fasculata is well, you know what, I better leave us zoomed out here. Okay, this zona fasculata is different than the zona glomerulosa in that its cells, and you know what, I better go ahead and move this, otherwise it is going to be in our way big time. We don't want that, so I'm just going to move that over a little bit so we can continue on with our discussion here. Okay, so let's kind of draw this out. So the zona fasculata has this elongated fascicle, thus fasculata, this fascicle looking appearance, right? So the cells form these columns. Cells form these columns called fascicles, like this. And these are cells I'm trying to draw here. And in the middle we have sinusoids. So we have fascicles, and we have sinusoids in between. Okay, and so this whole level here is known as the zona fasculata. Okay, so what is what is produced by the zona fasciculata? Well, we said that mineralocorticoids were made by the zona glomerulosa, and it turns out that the zona fasciculata makes glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids. Okay, and glucocorticoids, you know, we oftentimes think of glucocorticoids. The first one that comes to mind is always cortisol. That's that thing you produce a lot of when you're under a lot of stress. It's kind of bad for you when you get a bunch of it for a long period of time. But besides glucocorticoids, we're also making androgens. We're also making androgens in the zona fasciculata. So androgens like, testosterone, also androgens are a precursor to estrogens. Okay, so that's what's going on in the zona fasciculata. Now, we still have one more zone, because we said that we're producing, these three different things, and each one of the zones has its own thing that it produces. And we've already looked at mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids, but what about sex steroids? Where are they produced? Well, they're produced in this last layer that we haven't talked about yet, and I'm going to just kind of move over here, I guess. So continuing down, the deepest layer of the cortex is known as the zona reticularis. Zona reticularis. And it has this this network, reticular look to it in the way that the cells of this layer are arranged. So we have the zona reticularis down here, and I wouldn't say it really has any particular structure. So this is the zona reticularis. And the zona reticularis is responsible for making sex steroids. And as we look at this layer, I said that androgens are made over here, right? But I should preface that by saying that it's only a few. Most of the sex steroids are made in the zona reticularis, and so I should say most. So we have most as opposed to few. And it's a little bit confusing. But we should think of the zona reticularis as being the main factory, the main powerhouse for making those androgens, testosterone, estrogen precursors, right? There's kind of some crossover here, because not only are sex steroids made in the zona reticularis, we also have some glucocorticoids being made here. So what I should say is glucocorticoids, remember that would be like cortisol. That's the well-known poster child glucocorticoid. But I should say few. And here I should say a lot. Alright, so that concludes this video on the layers and the molecules produced, the hormones produced by the adrenal cortex. Thanks for watching.